In our next example, what we're going to do is build a form to save settings for our module. So this is when we want to expose certain settings to a user. When we do so, we can use a utility function in Drupal called System Settings Form, which works similar to the confirm form that we just went over, in that it supplies a lot of the utility around the form, so our building process is fairly minimal. Let's start by going to the module folder for the input module, and we're going to open up step 11, which is called Settings Form. Go ahead and copy all the code that's in the file, and we're going to paste that over everything that's currently in input.module, and we're going to save it. Okay. Just like with confirm form, our process of creating a system settings form has a couple of steps to it. First of all, we need to generate our form, and then we need to pass it to the utility function to add whatever it needs to it. And then we need to register the form inside of our hook menu. So let's go ahead and look at our hook menu first to see how we're setting this page. We'll scroll down to the bottom of hook menu, and we see we've got a new item here called admin/config/input. Whenever you add a path to admin/config, it will be added to a special directory of configuration pages. So this is a standard among modules so that users know where to find configuration for their module. We're giving it a title of input module, which is just the name of our module, a quick description, and for our page callback, we're using Drupal get form. So in our very first example of using forms, this is what we did to generate a page with our form in it. Because the Drupal get form function returns a build array for the form, it works just as well as wrapping that form in Drupal get form inside of a page callback. So we're just bypassing that whole process of creating a page to wrap around our form and just calling the form directly. Next, we're passing it page arguments, and in this, you might remember from previous videos, we pass it the name of the function that's returning the build array for our form. And then we're passing it access arguments. In this one, we are using a default function that's provided by Drupal core called access administration pages. So we assume that if somebody has this permission, they can visit this page. And finally, we're defining a file and file path for a function. So you can use file and file path on any menu item in order to separate it out into a separate file. And we'll talk about this in the menu system video. So what we're saying is we can look for our function in input.admin_inc, and that file is going to be found here. And we're using Drupal get path to get the path to our input module. Okay. So if we want to look at this function, we need to open up this file. So go ahead and jump back to your module directory. Go ahead and open up the input.admin.inc file. In this file, we're defining a single function, and this is the function that supplies the form build array for our admin settings page. And we're setting a single form input here, and we're setting the type to text area, the title to example setting. And we're using an attribute called default value. And this is the value that's set in an input when the page initially loads. So if somebody changes the input in this, the default value will be not taken into account anymore. And what we're doing is using variable get to grab a variable. Now, we're using a function down here. We see it return system settings form, and then we're passing it form. And this function supplies some additional utility. In particular, what it does is take every input in the form, and it assigns the key for that input to a variable. So it's important when we're creating inputs inside of our settings form to use the convention of using our module name as a prefix and then the name of our setting as the full key for the form input. And when we use variable get to grab the default value, what we're going to pass it is the name of our input, because that's the variable that will get set. And we're setting the default value of variable get to blank. We're giving this a description, and we're making this required. And then finally, we're passing it through the system settings form. Okay, let's go ahead and make sure that everything is saved. And let's go ahead and flush all of the caches in order to rebuild our menu registry. Once that's done, we'll see a new item in our configuration section in our menu, right here, Input Module. And we can click this to view our settings form. Now if we input a value here, and we click Save Configuration, that value will be saved behind the scenes and then loaded as that variable get in our default value attribute right here. So we can go to another page, for example, and then come back to it, and it will display in that input. If you've watched this Forms API video all the way through, then you probably already have some ideas of things that you want to play with when it comes to forms in Drupal. But if you're still wrapping your mind around things, I'd suggest starting out with the first couple examples where we talk about render arrays and passing render arrays through page callbacks. Make sure you get the idea of render arrays, because that same idea goes on through several of the different APIs in Drupal. From there, probably the most exciting parts of the Form API involve the states attribute, where you can dynamically show or hide different elements based on the values of other elements, and the Ajax attribute, which lets you dynamically load new inputs or remove inputs. So I'd suggest playing with those and really getting a feel for how to create dynamic forms. And when you're comfortable, go ahead and move on to the next video.